Welcome to Closing the Loop, a podcast presented by Lakeside Process Controls, where we connect you with experts, end users, and suppliers in the industrial automation industry. My name is 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗏, Business Unit Lead for Measurement Solutions, and the host of the show. Each episode will be featuring special guests from either Lakeside, Emerson Automation Solutions, or other industry leaders. We hope that through these conversations, we can quite literally close the loop between your current knowledge and the latest advancements in industry. Our goal is to educate you and provide you with ideas for improving both efficiency and safety throughout your facility. With that, I'd like to introduce you to today's special guest. His name is Eric Snyder, and he is joining us from Emerson's Automation Solutions team. More specifically, he's the Senior Business Development Manager for AMS Device Manager and AMS TREX. Now, if you don't know what either of those are, no problem. This episode is going to be especially beneficial to you. We talk about what AMS Device Manager is, how to deploy it, and ultimately why it's beneficial. And quite frankly, this is a solution from Emerson that if you haven't heard of, you really should stick around for because it can significantly help you, especially when it comes to prioritizing assets during shutdown. So we talk a lot about that, and I personally learned a lot from the conversation. We then talked about the AMS TREX, the TREX handheld, as maybe you might have heard of that before, or maybe previously you're familiar with the 475 or the 375 or even the 275. So this is the latest and greatest when it comes to handheld device technology, beneficial for connecting, configuring to instrumentation and valving, and really one of the best tools in your tool belt if you don't have it already. So we had a great conversation about both of these Emerson solutions, and if you stick around to the end, we even have a little bit of a sneak peek as to what is coming for these Emerson solutions. So I quite enjoyed my conversation, like I said, with Eric. I learned a lot. I hope you do too. Just as a reminder, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode because we have lots of great topics upcoming. And with that, I'll turn it over and hope you enjoy our show.
Thanks, Justin. Great to be here.
And where are we right now?
It's quite the backdrop you got here set up.
We're not in our usual setup here, and I should probably address that for the audience. We are in beautiful Brandon, Manitoba. Luckily, there's no snow. There was snow last week, so we lucked out on that. And you would think for the end of May there wouldn't be snow, but that was a real concern for us.
Yeah.
So this week we are at, I keep forgetting the name of the center. I want to say Clarkson, but it's not Clarkson. I want to say Keystone. There we go. We're at the Keystone Center. I knew it was related. It was a non-Emerson sponsored rink, but you think it would be. And so we're here this week in Brandon, and we're actually headed to Winnipeg tomorrow for our Manitoba Technology Expos. And so we thought, since we had Eric in town and I was in town, let's bring the podcast on the road and take advantage of that. So thanks for coming to Brandon. Thanks for coming to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad that we did this. This is great.
Yeah. So hopefully it's a good backdrop. You know, they don't have any ice right now back there, so you might see some shots of them cleaning. I think they had a rodeo, or they're going to have a rodeo, so there was dirt in there yesterday, so at least it's a better shot today. So, okay, now that we got that out of the way, I feel like, the elephant is out of the room. This is why we are here, and not the beautiful Lakeside setup that we usually have. But
and now that I've been here a few days, I'm used to the 16 hours of daylight.
Yeah, it's pretty weird, isn't it?
It is pretty weird.
It's weird when you get out of the restaurant and you're going to bed and it's 10 o'clock at night and you're like, okay, I'm going to have to shut my blinds here. I can't believe how much daylight they have. And then you wake up and it's still light. You're like, did it even go down? Right? Yeah, so maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about where you're from, your background.
Sure. Yeah, so I joined Emerson back in 1996, so I've been there with about 28 years now, and that was about a year longer than AMS Device Manager's been out as a product. So I've been in that group for the entire time, just taking on various responsibilities, but now I'm more of a subject matter expert, business development leader for them, and I manage all of North America, so all of the impact partners in the U.S. and Canada, and I do that for both AMS TREX and AMS Device Manager. I'm based in the East Coast. I've been moving around a lot, it seems like every 10 years, so I started with Emerson in Minnesota. I was there for about 10 years, and I went out to the Illinois, to the Chicago area for about 10 years, and then for the last 10 we've been in Maryland.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so all east to central.
Yep, and slowly moving south to get a little bit warmer. So 10 degrees warmer, 10 degrees warmer. So.
Next stop is Florida. Yeah.
We'll see.
I know a few BDMs who have done that. I know they operate out of Florida. And like, I mean, hey, there's a lot of business in Florida, but not all the business is in Florida, right?
Yeah.
So you've been with working on AMS. I think I heard earlier from since the 1.0 days.
That's right. Yeah. So I actually joined about a year before AMS Device Manager was released as a product.
Wow.
So when they were in the development stage, we actually repped a different product at that point in time. I don't think it's even in existence anymore, but we were doing that where we were finishing the development of our own software. So I've been with it that entire time when it was delivered on like 16 floppy disks.
Oh, wow.
We had high school kids doing the testing for it and stuff.
That's cool.
So anyway, it's come a long, long ways. And
I know what you're thinking. I do know what a floppy disk is. I feel like I definitely played video games that were on CDs. Floppy disks, I remember seeing, we had those around storing things on there. So yes, I definitely was around for those days. That's really cool. So that's exciting to have been with kind of the continuous evolution of that. So this is exactly why we wanted you on the show.
Okay, great.
I didn't realize AMS Device Manager had been around for that long, actually. And it's something that I think not many people know about, or maybe some of the generations that are still at Lakeside who were around when it first came out know it, love it, talk about it all the time. But some of the newer generations, I feel like, aren't as familiar with it. And I think it's a real shame because it's a really, really great solution that solves a lot of our customers' problems.
Yeah, one of the things that early on, it's like we didn't have all the technology that we have now. And so we were forced to go out and travel. When we were to do a launch of a new release of a product, I would come and be with Ed, I'd come and be with Natalie, and it was doing manuals that we would print out of all the slides to say, here's the sales book for this, and here's what's new. So back then it was a little easier to kind of convey that because we had dedicated people focusing on this, and we were doing that physical connection where now with technology there's, we did a webinar and we're talking about this and call and ask your questions. So we've gotten a little away from that personal touch of it, and it just affects who's focused on it as well in some cases, I'd say. Yeah,
totally. It's like the technology is amazing to just be able to host a Microsoft Teams meeting or a WebEx or something like. I find from a sales perspective, it's really easy because you don't really have to focus on trying to meet with customers because they come to you. They have a challenge. They have a problem. Hey, let's get on a 30-minute Teams call. Let's work through your application. And by happenstance, you end up talking about, why the product is so great, how it's going to solve their problems, and you help educate them on maybe what's difficult about their application. So it's different, but at the same time, you lose that in-person connection.
That's right.
Which, tying it all back, that's why we're here in Brandon, Manitoba this week, right? Is seeing the whites of someone's eyes, right? And being able to explain it to them. And, I think especially when you have complicated subjects and everybody's inundated with webinars and online, being able to get someone in a room and show them something physically and talk to them, like huge connections, and people really get it.
Yeah, and it's great. Like we had, maybe 18 customers in there today talking to us about AMS Device Manager and TREX and even AMS Optics, and it's just the connection of talking about solutions, letting them asking the questions, answering what their concerns are, what they've been thinking or wondering about, some frustrations that they may have, but it's that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you, like I said before, maybe people aren't as familiar with AMS as I think they should be. Maybe could you do, a high-level overview about what AMS Device Manager is in a nutshell?
Okay. Yeah, so AMS Device Manager, it's our fit-for-purpose software tool.
Yep.
That is for managing instruments and valves. And it doesn't matter to me so much if it's an Emerson product. People get to pick which instrument or valve they want to use in their process. So if it's competitors or if it's ours, hopefully, great. So we're open in AMS Device Manager to manage anybody's HART, Foundation Field Bus, wireless HART, even some Profibus devices. And we can do that in the software. And we do that by connecting to those devices. The biggest benefit of AMS Device Manager is the connection we have to those devices live out in the field. So we can know the health of those devices back in AMS Device Manager to alert the correct people so that they know if they need to take a corrective action. So AMS Device Manager really is around configuration, it's around calibration, it's around diagnostics, it's around documenting as found as left information that you can do. But there is a lot of capability that they heard about today just because there's so many features and functions within the software over 28 years that it can get overwhelming, so people have to start off small and kind of grow into it. But that's really what it's doing. We manage that in our software for up to 30,000 tags. It's a client server based system to help them do diagnostics and really know the health of the devices in the field.
Yeah, and actually, I've heard some customers really describe it as kind of like the first part of their day, right? Like they go into AMS, and that's how they decide, what they're doing today, what they're doing tomorrow, what they're doing next week, based off of how critical some of the alerts and the diagnostic tools are. Right.
Yeah. With that benefit to connect through these 20 different systems, some of them Emerson systems, a lot of them non-Emerson systems, like PLCs, for example. Getting that to monitor those devices, whichever devices they are, for their health, that comes into a centralized alert monitor, we refer to it as. And so when you're online connected to them, we get that health status back into the system. And like you said, that's their punch list. Here's what I need to work on. These are the things with credible, actionable information that I can take based on whether it's a radar gauge and what Rosemont says is corrective actions, whether it's a Fisher valve and what Fisher says is corrective actions to take for travel deviation or low air supply pressure as an example. So they use that as their punch list, as you said. That's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, that's incredible. So that's basically the extent of my knowledge about AMS Device Manager. This is the piece that I always wanted to know about, and it's probably pretty simple. So I get that it's a software solution that works with basically anybody's valve or instrument, as long as it's speaking HART or field bus or wireless HART, or maybe Profibus. And my question is, how does it actually get the data, right? Like where does AMS live? How does it get all this data?
It's one thing that's different with AMS Device Manager, because with the right user security privileges, if you have the ability to take a valve out of service or stroke it or change the range of a transmitter, therefore it's down low on the network. So it's going to be typically what they'll refer to as the process control network. So it's below a DMZ area. It's more of defense in depth strategy, but it is down on the process control network. It's not up on a site network like an L3 where more Plant Web Insight applications go, or maybe even some of our other software like AMS MachineWorks for vibration analysis, or even up on the business network, the wide area network, where more of an AMS optics would sit. So AMS Device Manager is down low on the network because with the right privileges, you can affect the site by taking valves out of service or doing diagnostics on different instrumentation. So the best way for us is to have an online path to the devices in the field. So these online communications through 20-some different systems, there's a lot of PLCs that we can interface with. That's a great opportunity for people to focus on, because traditionally the system sales is selling Delta V, and as long as Delta V is in play, or if it's sold, then almost 100% of the time AMS Device Manager is sold as well.
Part of it.
But that's just going to be a subset of the devices that are at site. They're always going to have a skid or another area that I would call stranded devices that aren't communicating to AMS Device Manager, but they may have a local PLC. So we have over 20 different interfaces to these different systems, like Allen Bradley, for example, just to pick on that, is that if they have a system that supports HART, that has HART I/O cards, that has HART devices in the field, then we can just make an Ethernet connection to connect the AMS Device Manager station up to that network, and then we can go out and learn the infrastructure of the Allen Bradley system to find those HART devices to communicate with them. So that's how we're getting all this information, whether it's through a PLC, whether it's through Delta V, whether it's through our Emerson Smart Wireless Gateway for our wireless devices out in the field. There's lots of ways we can bring information in.
Okay, that makes sense. So it just piggybacks off of all the data that's already coming into, whether it's PLC, DCS, or
and that's one thing, just to alleviate any kind of concern, is that AMS Device Manager and the AMS TREX, they're secondary masters on the network. So the PLC, the DCS, they're always going to be a primary master. So there's no worry about us taking up all the bandwidth to do communications or diagnostics on valves or smart meter verification. That's not a concern, because we're not the primary master. We're always letting the DCS, the PLC, being in control of those devices.
Wow. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Now, the piece that I wanted to learn more about too was the HART component, right? Because anytime you connect via HART to any one of our instruments, you get a ton of data. And if our customers aren't using HART I/O cards, how are you able to still get that data?
Yeah, so if we can't talk through a system, that's always the least expensive solution, I would say, if we can just make an Ethernet connection to it. Otherwise, if we can't talk through a system, and I'll say like a 𝗧𝗓𝗓𝗦 system, if somebody has one of those DCSs that have not worked with Emerson to develop an interface with, or they don't support standard system-to-system network protocols like HART IP, where we can just interface that way, then we have to either go around that system somehow. So there's really two solutions. That would be, one is you could put thumbs on all those devices that you want to bring back and have them go to a gateway, and then the gateway brings that HART signal into AMS Device Manager. So then the concern is, well, what's the cost of a thumb? How many devices am I going to put it on? What does the gateway cost? What's the interface to AMS Device Manager? And that's just the network. We do that all the time to the gateway itself. Or you can, instead of doing thumbs, then you weigh it against the cost of doing physical HART multiplexers out in the field. And so these HART multiplexers are typically for 32 devices, input and outputs, but you have to parallel wire off of the termination panel. So that's the part that gets a lot of people, is it's more of not the price of the unit itself, but it's the installation, it's the cabinet space that you're going to take up to power that device, to secure it, in an enclosed environment, to be able to do that. So usually people prefer to do an Ethernet connection to a system through a standard network protocol. We usually refer to that in AMS Device Manager as HART IP, is that standard networking interface. But otherwise, thumbs or multiplexers, and it comes down to a price point for users and what they pick.
That makes sense. And for the users who don't know what thumbs are, because I realize sometimes, actually, I don't know. I look this up every time. I forget what the acronym actually stands for.
So it is the HART Update Module. So that is the...
T is the.
Yeah, T is the. So that is the HART adapter that you're putting onto the wired device to have it broadcast it back. So
that's what it stands for, the HART Update Module.
Yep. So it's
I always thought it was something...
Engineers name our products, right? And so that's what it is.
Wow, the HART Update Module. That's simple. I thought it was something more complicated. I don't think I'll forget that. So again, for those people who don't know, so if you have a wired device that has HART capabilities and you wire this in, I think we also call it a thumb because it just looks like it
looks like a thumb.
Looks like a thumb that you just stick into the side of a transmitter head, and then it wirelessly outputs all of those variables. So you can just basically take a wired instrument and then give it a wireless output in addition to that wired.
That's right.
So that makes a lot of sense to me. So okay, I'm happy we addressed that one. Yep. The other piece though is then, so this really relies on the HART data. So my question is, in your experience, how often do you find that customers are pulling HART variables back into their control system? Is that very common? Not very common?
So it's pretty challenging for people to buy just a pure analog device, I would say. So they may have existing install bases where they have older devices that were just analog.
Okay.
But for the most part, everybody is buying HART devices. So Emerson developed HART back in the 80s. And it was to fight specifically against Honeywell DE protocol, right? Honeywell had the dominant DCS, the TDC 3000 at the time. They were number one. Emerson had RS3 and Provox. They were going to be coming out with the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 system that they were doing all the development work on, trying to take over that number one spot. But all of our device divisions back in the 80s and 90s, selling valves, selling transmitters, we couldn't break in because Honeywell was the dominant DCS, and they spec'd in their own products because they talked to their own private protocol, which was DE. And so that's why we ended up developing HART and then turned it over to the foundation. And so pretty much that's the standard now by far in the industry, and you hardly ever hear about Honeywell DE. And then you know where we went with 𝗬𝗓𝗓, and 𝗬𝗓𝗓 is number one in the DCS space as well. So from a HART perspective, they may bring just the analog signals in. That's typically what 99% of the users are doing and controlling off of, but that digital aspect is still there. They could bring in some additional information digitally into a control system or a PLC, but they're typically hardly ever, they are not controlling off of that digital signal. They're controlling off of the analog. And so what do we do with AMS Device Manager or TREX is we use that digital information so that we can give maintenance an easier path to make changes or check the status of those devices.
Yeah, okay, so that I'm happy you said that too. That helped clear it up for me because in my experience, most of the control systems just have, 4-20 IO card. They don't have anything with HART. But as you're explaining it, I'm recognizing, the HART still lives on the wire. Just like when I connect to my radar, anywhere in that loop, I can pull those HART variables. The same with AMS. So it's independent of if they have HART IO cards, which is, I think that's a huge thing that I didn't really realize that you're saying that.
So one thing, just to be clear though, is that even if you're just controlling off of the analog signal, you still need to have a HART IO card.
Oh.
If you have an analog card, it's going to block the HART signal.
Gotcha.
So in order for us to talk through a PLC, an Allen Bradley, let's say, they have to have a HART IO card. If they just have an analog card, the digital aspect doesn't get through, only the analog, and AMS Device Manager needs that digital aspect of HART.
Oh, so you do need the HART. Oh,
so
okay.
you need to have a HART IO. You need to have HART devices in the field. You need to have HART IO. But most people, unless it's a cost-conscious project, then they would say, let's lower the cost and take out the HART IO and put an analog IO. And then it's, some of the customers today, they have some systems with HART, some that don't. And it's the cost of, what does it cost to upgrade the card versus put a multiplexer in versus put thumbs in? And that's the scenario that they go through. So I just wanted to make sure that you need to have that HART IO card still, because we need to have access to that device in the field.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I would agree. I feel like every instrument I work with now or see in the field has the HART capabilities. It's whether or not, that was the part I was questioning, whether or not the control system had the HART IO card. So that's needed. And how often do you see that? Because that I feel like is less common.
So I would say from an Emerson standpoint, unless it's a low cost minimum initial bid type project where cost is an issue, HART is always the HART IO, especially if you're doing electronic marshalling or charms. Charms will have one HART modem per channel, so it's a dedicated channel communication, faster, even though HART is 1200 baud. But it's better to have one modem per device that you're talking to versus, let's say, an 8-channel IO card that's HART. You have one modem that's going to talk to 8 devices, so it just has to cycle through. Or if you have a HART multiplexer, it could be one HART modem for 32 AIO points on there and stuff. So
now I know we've kind of derailed a little bit, but you got me really interested in HART. So would there be other reasons for a customer to upgrade to HART IO besides AMS?
So it's by far the most widely available. It's going to be hard to order a device from Rosemont, let's say, that's not HART. Sure, they may have Ethernet IP or they may have Modbus as a secondary communication protocol, but for the most part, HART, or in some cases still Foundation Field Bus. But for the most part, it's going to be hard not to order a HART device. HART device, but the HART IO cards. Yeah. So from users, almost all systems that I would say, especially when it's on an Emerson system like a DCS such as 𝗬𝗓𝗓 or even one of the Ovation systems for our power and water users, that they, for the most part, have the HART cards.
Oh, okay.
So they could upgrade if they needed to, but then it's that cost point. So I would say for the most part, most of the PLCs out there too, probably, I say most, but it's probably more closer to about 50% of them. It's more of just going out there, and when you're out selling a transmitter or selling a control valve or selling a DCS, or you're doing a vibration walk around route out at a site, if you're looking at to see when you're out there, hey, they have a PLC. It's like, what does that PLC do? And if you can at least identify it and bring it into your organization in Lakeside to have, okay, is it the reliability team through Vince that's going to be responsible for following up on that? Is it your valve services team that are going out and selling valves no matter whether they have 𝗬𝗓𝗓 or they have PLCs out there? It could be valve services. It could be, I also have my systems group that's selling 𝗬𝗓𝗓. They could look at that information too, but it's almost like we need to know I'll say pretty much every site will have a PLC. It's just whether or not it has HART IO cards on it.
Gotcha.
And that's the thing to really try to figure out and see if we can talk to and through that, because that can help us tie more assets or more tags into AMS Device Manager, which gives us the ability to scale our system up and provide more useful information to them or more value to the customer.
Okay. Yeah, that helps a lot, because I that was the one piece that I was always trying to figure out. Okay. So going into a little bit more about the system architecture and the components. So let's say I'm a customer who wants AMS. And let's say I have a 𝗬𝗓𝗓 or a 𝗬𝗓𝗓𝗑, as some of us like to say.
You're going to hear about that one.
Oh, yeah. 𝗬𝗓𝗓. Let's say we have that and we're all ready to go. What do I need to get this going? Is this a standalone system on its own? Does it need to be, a separate computer that gets plugged into my control system? How does that all work?
So there's always like 3 different ways to deploy things. But normally what I would see in a larger site installation, they will typically put the server plus for AMS Device Manager. It's a client server. So the server is where the database is. It's where the user security is. It is where all the licensing is. That is typically up in a DMZ area. And it may even be in a secure IT environment where people aren't going to go access that machine. They want to kind of protect it because it has all that, the database and the other information. It's not always securely protected. It doesn't have to be, but that's typically what we see, especially when you get to some larger customer sites. And then from there, specifically to answer the question about if it's on 𝗬𝗓𝗓, because we have such a tight integration with 𝗬𝗓𝗓, we have to have some version of AMS Device Manager on the Pro Plus. And so that typically means if I got the server up in the DMZ area, then I'm going to put a client station on the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 Pro Plus. So you have to have some version of AMS, a client or the server, down on the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 Pro Plus. So that is a more of a larger customer installation, and then from there you can put more clients out across the system. You could put a 𝗬𝗓𝗓 maintenance station in the shop where the E&I techs are and put a client there so that it's easily accessible to where they're doing their day-to-day job and their work, so they don't have to go walk over to the control room to get into it. If it was a little bit of a smaller site, to save cost, they would typically put down the server plus on the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 app station. And the only reason why they choose to do that is to separate it out, to say the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 database is on the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 Pro Plus, and I have the server plus for AMS Device Manager on the app station. It's just the thought process of not having 2 databases on the same server to overload resources, or possibly. It's not going to happen, but that's the concern that people do. So they'll logically, more times than not, probably 80% of the time, put the server plus on the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 app station, and then you have to have a client on the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 Pro Plus. So then they put the client there, and then they put clients on maintenance stations throughout.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to simplify that.
Does that make sense?
I'm going to simplify it how I understand it. You can correct me if I'm wrong. The brains of it can live somewhere in basically isolation or amongst, the right security levels. And then the actual use of it can be throughout the plant in a variety of formats. Those can be separate, which is
and so we have a client server architecture, and so they can either do it on a thick client, or we actually have a browser-based system, which is a thin client that could make it more easily accessible so that they don't have to have thick installations of it. You just access your user security through the browser, and then you're on the system, whether it's read-write or whether it's read-only.
So thick versus thin, I assume like actually hardware, like a physical laptop dedicated to AMS versus just going like on my laptop here and just signing in on.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And we always have to have physical communication pass between the clients and the server. You can't disconnect a client from the server. The client has to always be in contact with it, just as a little technical thing for you.
The client being, like, so if I'm on, let's say I got my laptop beside me here and I want to connect to AMS, the actual client where everything is stored, let's say this is a plant here, it can be in the control room, like that has to be physically connected, but this can be wireless, right?
But it has to have constant communication. So it can do, if as long as you have strong Wi-Fi, you're right, you can do that. You can take a tablet out there.
Yeah.
If you don't have Wi-Fi and it doesn't have, a client's not going to work. So then you really are doing a second installation of AMS Device Manager to just use on a laptop.
Okay.
The only other thing that I would just add, not to confuse things hopefully, but just to say, hey, as you're starting to expand stuff out, because we're really trying to grow AMS Device Manager and trying to bring in more tags, and the biggest option that we have today is to pull in these stranded devices through these PLCs. And so to do that, to have this PLC connection, that really means it moves us up to where that server plus is up in that DMZ area. The reason why it's there is it's off the 𝗬𝗓𝗓 network. So you still have to have the client on the Pro Plus or the client on the maintenance station in the E&I shop, but because the server is up in the DMZ, it allows us to put another extension of a client up in that DMZ so that we can pull in a PLC network. Normally, they don't want to pull PLC networks into the 𝗬𝗓𝗕 system as well. Sure, they could, but it's separate manufacturers and separate things. They want to keep them separate. And so how can we get AMS Device Manager to tie in all these other PLCs? And we put a client up there in the DMZ as well, just for PLC communications.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense.
I hope so.
Yeah. to the
Clear
people,
as mud.
to the people listening, they absolutely get it, I'm sure. I think this is important to understand because I experienced this in the measurement solutions world where, it's very simple to sell a pressure transmitter and walk a customer through that. They see the total life cycle of this very, very clearly. And for me, anytime we're dealing with software, even like within the measurement world, if you can understand the nuts and bolts, you don't have to go super deep, but if you can understand and visualize, where do I start? How do I get to where I need to go? And then where do I use this for? Like if you can picture that all, it becomes like an easier pill to swallow. And you're like, okay, I can see this. I can do this. Like I can picture us implementing it. Yeah. And so to me, if I can explain, this is how this goes and it piggybacks off this, then at least I dumb it down a little bit, but at least I have a general understanding of the flows of things. And so I think that's really helpful. Just to clarify, so what are all the formats that I could access AMS online? You said tablets. I got my laptop here.
Yeah. So with our thin client, which puts it up in an HTML5 browser, then anything that's usually on site locally there, if you have a company phone that's on their VPN network, then you could just open up the browser, and if that gives you access into the device view server tying into the server plus, then you're going to be able to see that on a phone, on a tablet, but it is always on-site local premise deployment of what they have access to.
And then if you're not connecting with something that's hardwired, you'll need Wi-Fi.
Then you need to have Wi-Fi, just because the system, it needs to be able to communicate. So a client doesn't have a database or the user security or the licensing aspect for it, so it needs to always authenticate against the server. So somehow either a physical Ethernet connection or a strong Wi-Fi. We have some sites that, with remote operations or it's an offshore platform, they'll do satellite communications, they'll do radio frequency communications as well. And as long as the latency is within a certain range, we're going to establish that communication securely and be able to do that remotely. Okay.
So would you say that it's very common to have Wi-Fi throughout some plants, or is it a bit of a challenge still?
No, it's still a bit of a challenge. Yeah. So a lot of the sites, they'll have HART, wireless HART, obviously, but not a lot of sites will have Wi-Fi throughout. Some of the larger sites will, some of the larger customers will, so it's always a question, but it is, hey, specifically if I take it down to TREX, pairing and auto-syncing data with AMS Device Manager, if you have Wi-Fi in the field, TREX is going to automatically write that back into the AMS Device Manager database. If you don't have it in the field, it's still stored in the TREX, but if you have Wi-Fi in the shop, as soon as the TREX comes back in, it's going to synchronize at that point and say, hey, at this date and time, Eric was in the field, he made a change, here's the as found, as left data, but here's the time and date that it's synchronized with the database. And if you don't have Wi-Fi, then it still is a physical, you're in the 3-foot range of a USB cable, let's say. So you connect it in, and that's how it transfers the data. So Wi-Fi, there are more sites doing it, but it's still in the vast minority, I would say, that have that out in the field.
It's funny you say one thing, and my thoughts start going totally elsewhere, because it's like, holy crap, I didn't know that you could do that with the TREX. I didn't know the TREX did it. That's really cool. I know I wanted to keep this about AMS Device Manager, but the TREX, that's a pretty cool feature. Yep. I didn't know that. So you must be familiar then with the Cisco Wi-Fi. Like that's so obviously on the wireless HART side, being an instrument person, that's where we kind of talk is the wireless HART. And then there was this deal that Emerson did with the Cisco Wi-Fi routers to kind of piggyback those together. Maybe could you talk a little bit about that? Because that was where I always wondered, well, where it seemed like a little bit abstract with where did this connection come from? And now I'm thinking maybe it's the AMS team who was pushing for that.
Yeah, and there's other things like they're doing remote monitoring, or they're doing stuff with cameras out there, video, different things that can go over the Wi-Fi network, just not wireless HART. So we are the beneficiary of that as well from an AMS Device Manager, in that when you deploy those wireless gateways with the Cisco Wi-Fi, then obviously we get to take advantage of that too. So if they have a strong signal throughout the site, great. Then you can use a laptop as a client and just roam around and do things in the field if you want to. You could take TREX up, whatever it is. It makes it easier, right? So
well, I guess then that's the next question is I'm sure a lot of people have is, okay, well, can I can't bring my phone or maybe my laptop or but you can bring a TREX.
That's right. So they're intrinsically safe. You can order it with that option to get the stickers on the back of the unit itself. So it is intrinsically safe as well.
The TREX just got cooler for me. I mean, it was pretty cool, but now it got even cooler. Wow, that's exciting. Okay, that's good to know. So I think we've covered enough about the architecture. I think at least I have a better grasp of things. And we've only briefly talked about maybe the benefits of AMS. Maybe we could talk a little bit about, once you get this implemented, what can you do with it, right? Like, what are some of these things and these realizations that customers have once they get their hands on it?
Right, and so that's a great point. So it can be used throughout the life cycle of the site or the plant or the mill. It can be used for startup and commissioning so that you can save a lot of time for that. People easily justify the use of AMS Device Manager during that startup on a capital project. But because it can say, hey, we're planning on starting, within this date, but by using these tools, you may be able to start up a week early, 2 weeks early, and that's a time savings, but it is more of you're producing product that you're selling, and that to them could be millions of dollars. And so that's the driving factor for them to start up. So on a startup and commissioning, that easily covers the cost of AMS Device Manager. I wish it was a $2 million product, for each one. That would be great and drive the use, but still, it's not. It's reasonably priced, and it's able to do that. So the value from a startup and commissioning is there, but the widest use of it then is ongoing daily use. What are your job tasks that you're doing? So it could be the daily aspect of using that to drive improvements, whether it's reliability or whether it's maintenance. Now, you easily have the savings of time. How can we streamline calibration activities by downloading a route to a calibrator like a Fluke, doing the tests and then uploading the results, not having to manually write it down on paper, not having to type it back into a database to track it, hopefully, versus putting it in a filing cabinet. But how can we save 40 to 50% of the time by downloading and uploading the results so it's electronically tracked, right? So there is time savings for a lot of features within AMS Device Manager. You could use it to shoot a loop, let's say, which is I'm going to tell the device, the transmitter, to output 4 milliamps. So simulate 4 milliamps. I'm going to see what the operator sees on the graphic over on the control system. You can do that without having to walk out into the field with AMS Device Manager. So a time savings is one aspect of it. But unfortunately, I would say most often than not, that's not going to be able to give them a return on their investment. That's going to be like 2 times the cost or 3 times the cost. Some of them are driving us towards. The biggest thing that they're going to get out of it from the power users of AMS Device Manager is more of the lost opportunity or the cost avoidance aspect of it, which is because we're monitoring all of these devices out in the field and we're telling you the condition, what is the health of those devices, what are the active alerts. If they didn't see that alert and that valve went down or that transmitter, the secondary sensor failed on a temperature sensor, and all of a sudden the operator loses that variable from a control loop, what happens? What does that mean to their business? And so the big power users of AMS Device Manager take the time to work with their finance team, their CMMS teams, to really understand the cost. If this happened on this, it's not every device that they have, but it's the critical ones. They'll know which ones those are to say, if this happened and we didn't see it, what would that mean? Well, it would have cost us $5,000 to repair or to order emergency service or parts or something. It's still a small number, but that would have had us down for 6 hours, and that 6 hours is worth $250,000. And that's the biggest thing to get them to document, whether they're sharing that with Lakeside or sharing that with Emerson in an article or presenting it at Emerson Exchange. If they just do that internally, that's going to promote the success of it to their upper management. And so that drives it as well. So that's how people get savings out of AMS Device Manager in a few examples.
Yeah, that makes sense. To me, that's the financial driver, right? Is exactly that. You're not going to miss any of these critical pieces with your critical instruments or valves, and you're going to avoid lost time or shutdown or damage or something catastrophic, right?
Right.
Which is a little bit hard to have those conversations, it's it's like selling insurance, right? It is, right? And so like I know that it's analogous to, I think, selling flame and gas detection, right? Working with customers, it's a safety thing, and that is more of a safety thing as opposed to like you can actually, there's lost time implications there too, but it's a different conversation that you have to have that a lot of customers aren't really thinking about, right? They're trying to run a plant,
right? And
it is something they're concerned about, but they just want to, maybe not think about the ways to mitigate that, or they're not aware there are ways to mitigate that potentially.
That's right. Yeah. And so once they start to see the power of AMS Device Manager and being online and connecting in through a gateway, through a DCS or a PLC, whatever it is, in one of those various ways, that is the driving thing that they want to get to. They want to get to that online to get the device health out of the asset, to know the condition of it so that they can take that corrective action.
That makes sense. Would you, I wasn't aware about like greenfield new builds being able to use AMS, which actually makes a ton of sense. Is that very common, or would you say it's more existing sites looking to add AMS that you mostly deal with?
So within the U.S., there are some greenfield projects that are going on, but it's not a lot. So it's definitely in the minority. It's bigger when you get outside of the U.S. and Canada, let's say.
Okay.
So it's going to be, most of it is going to be established brownfield sites that are already there that want to do something better. And because the software's been around, there's a lot of sites that just ask, and we can look it up in the database to see, did they ever purchase it? Did those people move on? They're not using it because typically somebody will get promoted. The use of AMS Device Manager will go back down because they were the only person that was using it. They didn't have a team that was trained. Somebody just took it on as a project. They get promoted out, and then all of a sudden the system's kind of going back down in use. And 2 years later, it's like, hey, I got this system. What can I do with it? And then we start it back up again, and they get another program going. So by far, it is the brownfield sites that have the greatest expansion opportunity or use case. And they may have it. It's just saying, hey, let's reactivate what you have. Let's get it up to the latest version. And then let's show you how to get different value outlets. Even though it has tons of capability, let's focus on what are your critical things or what's causing the issues at your site right now or causing you pain. And that's what we focus on.
I have you brought that up because that was going to be my next point or question was around the ongoing maintenance of AMS, because I think that's one thing that I often hear about is, it's one thing for a customer to implement it, but someone to keep it up to date and to utilize it, someone really needs to champion that, or else it can kind of fall by the wayside, as you were describing.
So you want to make sure that your users are trained on the system. So we offer Edge Services training. They can do that locally here at Lakeside. You can go to their customer site to do that if you want to. They can come to an Emerson office. There's a variety of ways that we can make sure that they're trained so that they know how to use the tool effectively. It's not my work test process said go grab the TREX and go out to the field, but you have AMS Device Manager. Why don't you just look at the diagnostics right there and see if there's any issue with it before you go out there, or if there is, what to expect when you get there. And so part of it is the training aspect, but to your point is there typically is an administrator, and it could be somebody from IT or OT. It could be somebody that's just identified as, hey, I am the site champ for AMS here. Or we even have our big, strong power users that have a dedicated person responsible for across all of their North America sites to make sure that AMS Device Manager is used. And then at each site, they have a local AMS champion that's there. But they're all getting trained. They all know how to use it. They're expected to use it. They're reporting information back. They're tracking that lost opportunity cost of the cost avoidance aspect of it as well. So they have to really drive it from their own organization to really make it successful. Yeah,
it's kind of a use it or lose it type thing, I feel like. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm pretty sure Lakeside can help update and maintain AMS databases.
That's right.
I remember in inside sales, that was I'm still picturing now one customer who heavily used AMS up in Northern Ontario, and I remember looking at it and there was outdated things, and they're like, this thing got removed, we didn't update it, and that was something we talked about was, hey, well, actually, like, it's out of date. We can help you update it, and once it's updated and you can trust all that information again, it's way more useful.
That's right, yeah. And there's updates all the time. It could be something like Measurement Solutions releasing new products all the time, so there's new device drivers. They need to be loaded into the system. Not only are there updates, but sometimes there's security patches or hot fixes for things that just didn't work the way that we expected them to, or a customer tried them at a site that was a little bit different than how it was tested, and we do patches that way. So the biggest thing to help keep them up to date, one is, yes, they're going to go to Lakeside to ask for that help or that service to make sure things are updated. From a user standpoint, as long as it's on product support, then they have access to the Guardian portal. And so to upload the registration files to that, Guardian's power is not just in technical support or getting an update to the software. It is matching the thousands of knowledge base articles out there against that system that was uploaded, their specific system. Here's what is installed there. Here's the patches that are already installed. Here's the drivers.
Oh, cool.
And it can match against that. So you're taking these list of 20,000 KBAs that are out there that you could potentially have to search through to here's the 10 that are related to your specific system to see if they need to update it from a security standpoint or a hot fix or a driver patch.
Now, so that's drivers and security, but in terms of let's say I uninstall an instrument and put in a new instrument. How does that get updated within AMS? It's all automatic?
Yeah, so there is a replacement feature within AMS Device Manager. It's a little bit different if it's with ΔV and AMS Device Manager, but for the most part, there is a replacement wizard. So AMS Device Manager tracks information in the database. Our database we refer to as Audit Trail is the accessibility of it. It's a SQL database, but Audit Trail gives you access to see all that historical information, the as found, as left. So we track it in the database two ways. We track it by the tag, that physical intrusion in the pipe, and we track it by we'll just say serial number.
Yeah.
So where that physical device moves through. So you don't have to do anything. If you're making changes in AMS Device Manager, it knows I'm on the system. Here's the as found, the as left, the date, the time, the PC that I made the change from. So all of that's documented there for it. And when you go into a replacement, if a device fails in the middle of the night and maintenance goes out to replace it, they can grab one out of inventory. They can go out there and install it in the field. They can take the old one out. They can come back into AMS Device Manager, click in the database for that failed device and say, I want to replace that device. Which device do you want to replace it with? Well, I just put that new one out there. Here's the new one. And it does a replace wizard. So it lines up all those keys in the database for it to keep everything in sync within AMS Device Manager on how we're tracking it. It'll say, what are you doing with this old device? Is it retired and you're going to throw it away? Or is it spare and you're going to put it back on the shelf after you cleaned it up and did some repair work on it? And then you can go ahead and use it again later on. But we have to do that replace wizard in AMS Device Manager because you can only have one TT100. You can't have it, so it's going to rename the old one TT100 old or something like that.
Okay. And so that's where some customers can get out of date databases because if you're not going through that process, then it can get really messy really fast.
We had some of those conversations today with some of the customers in the room afterwards as well. So they're doing exactly that. And we have some different processes in place to say, hey, if we as a service, if Lakeside as a service, or if the customer wants to try to take that on themselves, that says, here's how you can find those devices that were not correctly replaced in our database. Yeah, you're still in control. Yes, they're still out there, but our database really needs some cleaning up with how we're tracking all that. Because if you don't do it correctly, if you just put another device out there and you said, well, it's TT100 and I'm going to make the other one TT100 100_01 or something, you need to, it's not replacing everything. It's still the alert monitor to tell you the health is still looking for the old device name because that was the one. It's the replace wizard is critical to this whole process is the point.
Yeah, no, that's very clear to me. That makes sense. I could see that just, from like the data perspective, you have to go through that or it just gets really messy really fast.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So that makes a lot more sense in terms of the process and the benefits. Are there any other reports or things like that you can pull from AMS?
So there are some specific reports that we have, and they are from calibration, let's say. So if you're doing calibrations, downloading procedures, uploading the results, you can see the results of a specific individual test and print that out. You can print out calibration certificates if you need somebody to sign off on it and put it in a booklet or a filing cabinet. There are historical trends that you can see over time from calibrations as well. So it's like, hey, you know what? I was smart enough. I purchased a 10-year stability guarantee from a Rosemont product, but my procedure still says calibrate it every year. Well, why are you calibrating? It's guaranteed not to drift for 10 years, right? You should at least do it 5 years, 7 years, maybe even the full 10 years before you're going to spend time doing that. You have more important things to do with your time. So there's some reports you can do around calibration, cross-reference reports, what equipment was used to do a test on a certain device. But from our audit trail, from our database, you can export data out. You can get it out through XML. You can get it out just through a generic export, and then you can open it up in Excel and do pivot tables or whatever else you need. It is possible to get data out. If people need to have custom reports, then we would reach out to say, hey, is Lakeside have somebody that could do that kind of thing to say, hey, we need a report in this specific format? Sure, it could be done. It's just more custom service work that needs to be done if it's an Emerson person or a local Lakeside person.
The second you start saying Excel and pivot tables, you get me excited as an engineer. That sounds exactly what I'm interested in. Give me everything in Excel and I can do wonders with it. So that's pretty cool. You got me kind of thinking a little bit about I don't know if you're familiar with the SQM, the signal quality metric function built in with our guided wave radars and non-contacting radars.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah, so basically, for those who don't know, it's 0 to 10 scale. It rates the signal quality. And in the guided wave radar or a non-contacting radar, in some applications, there can be buildup, right? Highly viscous applications, high coding applications. And buildup's okay, we can handle it, but at a certain point, we can't, and you'll lose a signal. And so what the radar does is it grades itself 0 to 10, 10 being the best, 0 being no signal. And you can actually look at and trend as the signal is dropping over time. In these applications, it tends to do that. And you can basically start to get to know your application where, hey, you know what, when it gets from a 10 to a 3, by the time it gets to 3, there's a lot of buildup on there. I know I have maybe 2 weeks before I lose my signal. So instead of waiting to lose the signal, put it in the PM, go pull that GWR out, get it cleaned off. And so I remember having conversations with a customer where they have all these applications that are really, really dirty, and they probably have 100 guided wave radars throughout their plant. And every single shutdown, they pull every single guided wave radar and they clean them all off, regardless of if they're dirty or not. They just pull them all off. Right. And so I remember having a conversation where I said, hey, wouldn't it be incredible if there was this tool that could tell you how dirty your guided wave radars were? And so this is something that they were looking to implement because even if 70% of them, or even in 90%, it saves you maybe 10, 20, even 30 guided wave radars being pulled every single time. There's a huge amount of labor savings with that, not to mention risk, right? Every time you pull an instrument out, there's a chance you could break it, you could damage it, you don't install it right, you have so, there's all sorts of issues with that. And so just understanding now what I understand about AMS, this would be something that to me would be so easy to just go into AMS ahead of time, look at all my GWRs before my shutdown and say, hey, here's what the signal quality metric says. Here's the 50 I actually want to look at, right? And if we have time, maybe we'll look at these other 10, right? I could see like that plan that you could put to place when you come to a shutdown. Yep.
No, I appreciate that because now I learned that. I'm going to use that in my examples when I'm talking about with users on different presentations. So a little bit more on AMS Device Manager. One that's super cool, and I'll say another scenario as well, is that there is a feature within AMS Device Manager that you can say, hey, I want to build a report. I want to grab these tags, and you can have it read the tags from the device. You can say, I want to grab these values. So if you want that, I'm sorry, it wasn't SPM. I'm thinking it's just
SQ quality. Yes.
Single quality metric. When you pull that in, you could say, hey, I want these tags, and I want this SQM for these, and I want whatever other information. I want the ranges or the engineering units, whatever it may be. You can do all that and then just tell AMS Device Manager to go get it. So there are people that do that with our software to be able to say, let's go look and I want a single report. Just let it run, let it communicate with these, let it pull those values out. So it may not just be having to open up each of the guided wave radars and looking at that metric individually, but you can have it actually put it into an Excel spreadsheet for you if you want to as well.
Save a lot of time there.
Yeah, so that's a different way to look at that as well. So that's always an option. And I really like that example because I had not heard that one before, so that's very cool. Typically, the same kind of thing would be happen when it's a shutdown or a turnaround, or sometimes they say these STOs that are going on. It's the same kind of thing in the valve world. So your Fisher counterparts, they're going to be saying, hey, you know what? I used to pull out 75 valves all the time, and I rebuild them whether they needed it or not. Well, now when the site goes down, you tell it to go out and do the diagnostics, fully stroke the valve open to close, look at that, give me the information about is this valve healthy or not. And then I don't have to pull out 75. I was going to be planned to be down for 14 days. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, geez, out of the 75, there was 68 that were fine. I don't have to do anything with. There's another 6 here that I can fix, but I can do that in place. I don't need to pull them out of the line. Then the other remaining ones, I just have to pull out and rebuild. So it's a great example with regards to this too. So that's very cool with the guided wave radar.
Yeah. Non-contacting as well, similarly.
Okay.
I do feel like I use it more on guided wave radars just because those probes can get built up. And I mean, they can handle a fair amount of buildup compared to maybe the non-contacting radars just because there's a big, long probe and things tend to stick to that a little easier, right? So it happens more often, I'd say. But there you go.
This is kind of one of the cool things about being with AMS Device Manager so long, I would say, because it's a window into the devices. Yeah. So it's like, hey, you're selling this transmitter, but this transmitter has all this capability in it. How can you see it? And so you need to visualize it, and AMS Device Manager is a great tool to be able to do that. And it gives me the opportunity because guess what? All the users will call me up and say, hey, this isn't working right, or I don't know how to do this with a specific device, whether it's a measurement solutions product or a Fisher product or an analytical, whoever it is, right? So I get to learn all these opportunities and all these other things just because it's a window into the devices. So.
Yeah, totally. Before we get going, are there any cool things that you can share with me? What are the latest and greatest or the innovations that we're going to be seeing with AMS, or maybe what are users asking you about that you can share, obviously?
Okay, sure. Yeah, no
promises.
One of the things that we've been asked to do is to make it easier to get data out. And so we've done an initial release of this. We have a data server. So they'll refer to it as an AMS Device Manager data server. Sometimes we just say the data server for AMS Device Manager. But that is, instead of getting it out through XML, it is getting it out through MQTT, which from an IT perspective, when they're going to map it over to another dashboard, like a PiVision dashboard or a Power BI dashboard, or put it into a report, it's a much easier way to do that. So we started with the first release of that, getting some information out of our database. Our next one that's coming out very soon will give us access to a lot more data in the database. So that's a very cool thing because people want to have higher visibility to that. They're at that point over the 20-some years with AMS Device Manager of asking if we can do things, but never really seriously trying to implement it. We'd always implement it, and we wonder why we didn't sell it. Well, the world wasn't ready for the stuff that they were asking for. It was more of a let's eliminate some competition or who we're going to go with, which vendor we're going to go with. But after the 20-some years now, especially like when we get all the way up to an AMS Optics, we see that they've made all the strides with their CMMS to keep track of instruments and valves in the CMMS so that they can actually write a work order against a radar gauge, let's say specifically, instead of the tank itself, and you have to know in the notes that it was the gauge that needs the work on. So people have come a long ways in their capability, and they're ready for more advanced tools from an analytics standpoint, from a reporting standpoint, and getting access to that data. But our biggest thing too is trying to get, how can we get more systems tied in? If we're already on the vast majority of our own 𝗪𝗪𝗕 and Ovation systems, you can always upkeep them, you can always upgrade them, but it is how do we expand that out? And so that is really going after this PLC market to be able to pull those in. So
that makes sense.
I talk about PLCs, but the same thing with safety systems, not only 𝗪𝗪𝗕-SIS, but also like Triconics or HEMA safety systems. We can talk to and through those systems just with an Ethernet connection as well. So we're trying to really expand out AMS Device Manager to take that on to give us easier access to more devices in the field.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I was half expecting you to say something about AI. No comment, Eric?
Okay. We do that in our AspenTech products, So the MTEL does that, and that feeds into optics. So we do have some very cool products that you can do that's out there with regards to that. But
yeah, I remember them telling us at one of the exchanges about some product they were working on. They shared it at Exchange, so I feel like I can talk about it, but it was kind of like an Alexa for your process, where you could just ask and you could just say, hey, why is this, why is this line or the part of this process operating at a higher temperature today? Like, that's kind of weird. Right. What's going on?
Yep.
And then it can say,
that could be very future.
Yeah, very future.
And if I say that kind of stuff, then it's like, well, I'm going to stop selling AMS device manager until we have that, right? And so it's like, no, very realistic as far as what's going on. But I get what you're saying.
It's fun to dream. It's fun to dream, and it goes, well, you should, fix your valve. It's leaking, right? I don't know, or something, right?
No, it's very cool. And it's cool that you can do like all that analysis too. It's like we have so much information about all the instrumentation in there and the alerts and the events that are going on, that to pull that data out to do some AI analysis against it, whether it's just something in ChatGPT to say, hey, here's all this data, tell me which device manufacturer is giving me the most alerts. Well, it could be because you have mostly the majority of one certain manufacturer, but what alerts are the most prominent? You could do pivot tables, but it's easier just and cooler to do it with like ChatGPT. Put it all in there to have it analyze it for you and tell you that too. So it's very cool what you can do with some of that.
We had a funny moment preparing for these seminars this week where you had made a presentation title and sent it over to Vince, who's our business unit lead for reliability solutions. He sent it to me, and I said, hey, well, I'm going to need a couple line description to explain what his presentation is about. And you were traveling here and stuff, so then I put it in ChatGPT and said, make a description. And then Vince is laughing because he says, oh, I think Eric got his title from ChatGPT. So ChatGPT wrote the whole thing. I thought that was kind of a funny.
No, it wasn't. It's exactly it. Vince said, well, Vince, here's what I would title this. This is what it's really going to be on, but that's more of the engineering type title, right?
That's boring.
So, and I put all that description into ChatGPT, and I said, well, it could be this title, it could be this title. So it's great that you did that too. It's so funny. It's like it can be anything to make it easier, and it's like, wow, it sounds really cool.
It's a great tool. Even the podcast questions. Hey, ChatGPT knew you were going to be an expert on AMS, TREX, and device managers, so I got my questions ready. So
great.
Anyways, Eric, thank you so much for coming this week. Thanks so much for being on the show. I learned a lot. Hopefully everybody listening learned a lot. If people want to learn more, where can they go to get more information about AMS?
Yeah, don't be shy. You can always reach out to me directly. You can do that through email. My phone number's in the system as well. You can look that up. If you have pre-sale questions, we have a team that is Ask PSS. So you can write to askpss@emerson.com. They're in all world areas. They're there 24 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
So there'll always be somebody to ask a pre-sale question. It's not technical support. It is marketing, sales support type questions. So you can write to the askpss@emerson.com site. You can always reach out to the local contacts here. If it's Vince, and there's lots of experts here locally. It's a great part of the Impact Partner Network, right? So it's the power of the local support that's out there, so they can do a great job locally, and it's always nice for your team just to reach out to know they have a local resource versus trying to reach somebody like myself who may be traveling or out of pocket for a week at a time, trying to wait to get a response back as well. So that's some great ways to
great.
do that as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Eric.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Before we go Wheat Kings. I guess that's the brand too. Next time we come, maybe they'll be playing and there'll be ice on there.
Yeah, that's right.
So, all right. Well, thank you very much for your time. And we are out.
Thank you.